Sign this. Julian thrust the manila envelope toward Joanna as rain hammered her mother's grave. The casket was still being lowered. The pastor was still praying. She was 7 months pregnant with his second child. Sign it now. His voice was ice. Commanding. Final. 3-year-old Holly clung to her mother's black dress, tiny fingers gripping the fabric as mud soaked through Joanna's knees. His new woman, Camille, stood behind him, sheltered under his umbrella, manufactured sympathy painted on her face. His parents watched from a distance, Victoria and Richard Westmore, arms crossed, barely concealing their satisfaction. Joanna's hand trembled as she stared at the envelope. Right there at her mother's grave. She was losing everything in that moment. But Julian made one catastrophic mistake. He had no idea who Eleanor Francis really was. He had no idea what empire she'd built in the shadows. And he had absolutely no idea what storm was coming for him. Before we dive into Joanna's incredible story, we need to go back to how it all started. But first, make sure you subscribe to this channel and watch till the very end, because what happens next, you wouldn't want to miss it. Now let's dive into the story. The cemetery was silent except for the sound of rain drumming on umbrellas and dirt hitting wood. Joanna Frances Westmore knelt at the edge of her mother's grave, her hand resting on her swollen belly, trying to breathe through pain that had nothing to do with pregnancy. The sky hung heavy and gray, matching the weight crushing down on her chest. Eleanor Francis was gone. The woman who raised her, protected her, loved her through every storm, now 6 feet under. And Joanna had never felt more alone. Beside her, Holly tugged at her dress. "Mommy, why is it raining on Grandma?" The 3-year-old's voice cut through the pastor's words, innocent and confused. Joanna pulled her daughter close, but couldn't find the words to explain that sometimes the sky cries when your heart breaks. Her husband, Julian, stood 3 feet away, but he might as well have been on another planet. His body was rigid. His eyes fixed on something beyond the casket being lowered into the earth. Something that wasn't his grieving wife or confused daughter. Joanna reached for his hand, desperate for connection, for comfort, for anything that reminded her she wasn't completely abandoned in this moment. He stepped back, away from her touch. The pastor's voice droned on about ashes and dust, about God's mercy and eternal peace. But Joanna heard none of it. She was watching Julian's hand slide into his jacket pocket, watching his jaw clench, watching him pull out that manila envelope, too official, too deliberate, too wrong for a funeral. He turned to her, his face blank, his eyes empty of the warmth she'd once believed in. "Joanna." His voice cut through the pastor's prayer like a blade. She looked up at him, rain mixing with the tears already streaming down her face. Holly pressed closer, sensing something terrible was happening even if she couldn't name it. He handed her the envelope. "What is this?" Her voice came out broken, barely a whisper. "Divorce papers. I already signed them." The words hit her like a physical assault. She staggered, her hand gripping the envelope as if it might explode. Holly started crying, frightened by her mother's reaction. "What?" Joanna's voice cracked. "Julian, what are you talking about?" He looked away, toward the line of black cars parked along the cemetery path. Toward Camille, waiting under that umbrella like she'd already won. "It's over. This marriage. Us. It's better this way. Better this way." Her mother was being buried. She was carrying his child. Their daughter was clinging to her, sobbing. And he thought now was the time to hand her divorce papers. "Are you serious right now?" Her voice rose, panic mixing with rage, grief mixing with disbelief. "My mother just died. I'm pregnant with your baby. Our daughter is right here. You're doing this here." Julian's face twitched, a flicker of something that might have been guilt or might have been annoyance. "I know the timing isn't ideal." "Ideal?" The word exploded from her. But waiting would only make it harder. "You're strong, Joanna. You'll figure it out." Strong. He was calling her strong while destroying her, while traumatizing their daughter, while desecrating her mother's funeral. That's when she saw them clearly. Victoria and Richard Westmore, his parents, standing 30 feet away beneath their expensive umbrella. They weren't crying, weren't mourning with her. They were watching, waiting. Victoria's mouth curved into something dangerously close to satisfaction. This wasn't spontaneous. This was planned, orchestrated. They had waited for her weakest moment, her mother's funeral, her pregnancy, her vulnerability, and weaponized it against her. Why? Joanna's voice came out hollow. Why are you doing this? Julian straightened his tie, avoiding her eyes, avoiding Holly's confused stare. Because I need you to understand that this is final. I'm with Camille now. He paused, and what he said next would echo in Joanna's mind for months. She's pregnant, and she needs me. The name slammed into her like a truck. Camille, his colleague, the woman whose texts had lit up his phone at midnight. The woman Joanna had asked about, only to be told she was paranoid, insecure, imagining things. Camille is pregnant. Joanna's knees almost gave out. Holly wrapped her small arms around her mother's leg, sensing the world was falling apart. You're leaving me, pregnant with your child, for another woman who's also pregnant with your child? It's complicated. He shoved his hands in his pockets like this was a business transaction. Like their daughter wasn't crying. Like her mother wasn't being buried. I don't expect you to understand, but Camille makes me happy. She makes me feel alive. He searched for the words that would cut deepest. You make me feel trapped. Trapped. The word carved itself into her brain. For years of marriage. A beautiful daughter. A baby on the way. A life built together. All reduced to one word. Trapped. Joanna looked down at the divorce papers in her shaking hands. Then at her belly. Then at Holly, who'd stopped crying and was now just staring at her father with an expression no 3-year-old should ever wear. Then at the fresh grave holding her mother. Everything she loved. Everything she counted on. Either dead or walking away. The mourners were fully watching now, the pretense of respect abandoned in favor of front-row seats to her destruction. She could hear the whispers, feel the questions forming. What did she do wrong? Why would he leave her like this? Maybe she wasn't enough. Maybe she deserved it. You're making a mistake. Her voice came out steady, colder than she knew she was capable of. You have no idea what you're doing. Julian actually smiled. Not a kind smile. A pitying one. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm choosing my happiness. He glanced at Camille, who offered him an encouraging nod. Something you should try. He turned and walked away. No hug for his daughter. No apology. No acknowledgement of the vows he broke or the family he was abandoning. He just walked back to his parents, who welcomed him with approving nods. Like he'd done something honorable. Joanna stood frozen at her mother's graveside, divorce papers clutched in one hand, her other hand protecting her belly. Holly pressed against her leg, silent now, watching everything. Learning lessons Joanna never wanted to teach her. The crowd began to disperse, uncomfortable with the scene they'd witnessed. Some offered hollow condolences that felt like insults. Others avoided her eyes completely, as if betrayal was contagious. She waited until everyone left. Until the workers began shoveling dirt into the grave. Until she was completely alone except for Holly and the ghost of her mother. She knelt in the mud, not caring about her dress anymore. Not caring about anything except the unbearable pressure in her chest. Mama, she whispered to the grave. I don't know what to do. He left me right here. Right now. At your funeral. How could anyone be that cruel? Holly touched her mother's face. Don't cry, Mommy. Grandma said she's always watching us. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees, and something shifted inside Joanna. Grief mixed with rage. Humiliation mixed with determination. Her mother had taught her many things. But the most important lesson echoed in her memory now. Baby girl, let them underestimate you. That's when you have the most power. Joanna didn't know about the fortune yet. Didn't know about the $300 million her mother had hidden away, carefully structured to protect her from exactly this kind of betrayal. Didn't know that this absolute worst moment of her life was actually the setup for the greatest comeback anyone would ever witness. But she would find out soon. And when she did, Julian Westmore would spend the rest of his life regretting every choice he made at that cemetery. Every cold word. Every calculated cruelty. Every moment he underestimated the woman who'd given him everything. He thought he'd buried her along with her mother. He had no idea he'd just awakened something far more dangerous. A mother with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The rain came down in sheets at Riverside Cemetery, turning the carefully manicured grounds into a landscape of mud and grief. Joanna Frances Westmore stood beneath a black umbrella that did nothing to keep her dry, watching workers lower her mother's casket into the earth. Each crank of the mechanism felt like another piece of her heart being torn away. Eleanor Francis. Gone at 63. The woman who'd raised her alone, who'd worked 3 jobs to put her through college, who'd held her hand through every heartbreak and celebrated every triumph. Now reduced to a wooden box disappearing into the ground. Joanna's hand rested on her swollen belly, 7 months pregnant with her second daughter. The baby kicked, as if sensing her mother's distress. Beside her, 3-year-old Holly pressed against her leg, her tiny black dress already soaked through. "Mommy, I'm cold," Holly whispered, tugging at Joanna's coat. "I know, baby. Just a little longer." Joanna bent down, trying to shield her daughter from the rain, from the grief, from everything wrong about this moment. But how do you shield a child from a funeral? From death? From the reality that Grandma was never coming back? Julian stood 3 feet away, separate, distant, like he was attending a stranger's service. His expensive suit somehow stayed pristine despite the downpour. He'd positioned himself at an angle that made it clear he wasn't part of their unit anymore. Not beside Joanna, not near Holly, just apart. "Daddy, I want Daddy." Holly reached for him, her small arms stretching across the space between them. Julian didn't move. Didn't even look at her. "Julian," Joanna said quietly, "she wants you." He adjusted his tie and stared straight ahead at the casket. "She's fine with you." The coldness in his voice made Joanna's chest tighten. This was the man who'd held Holly the day she was born, who'd cried with joy when they heard her first laugh, who'd sworn he'd always protect his little girl. Now he wouldn't even touch her. The pastor's voice rose above the rain, words about eternal peace and God's mercy, but Joanna heard none of it. She was watching Julian's jaw clench and unclench, watching his hand move to his jacket pocket, watching him pull out a manila envelope that looked too official, too deliberate for this sacred moment. He turned to her. His face was blank. His eyes, once warm and full of promise, now held nothing but cold determination. "Joanna." Her name sounded like an accusation. She looked up at him, rain streaming down her face, mixing with tears she hadn't realized she was crying. Holly clung tighter to her leg, sensing something terrible in her father's tone. He thrust the envelope toward her. "Sign this." "What?" She stared at the envelope, not understanding, not wanting to understand. "Divorce papers. I already signed them." The world tilted. Joanna gripped Holly's shoulder to steady herself, to keep from collapsing into the mud. "What are you talking about? It's over. This marriage. Us." He looked past her, toward the line of luxury cars parked along the cemetery path. "It's better this way." Better. The word stuck in her throat. Her mother's casket was still being lowered. The pastor was still speaking. Holly was clinging to her, soaked and confused. And Julian was serving her divorce papers. "Are you insane? My mother just died. I'm pregnant with your baby. Our daughter is right here. You're doing this here? Now?" Something flickered across his face, guilt maybe, or annoyance, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. "The timing isn't ideal, I know. But waiting would only make it harder. You'll figure it out. You're strong. Strong." He was calling her strong while ripping her life apart. That's when she saw her. A woman standing 15 feet away, sheltered under Julian's umbrella. The one he must have been holding before he walked over. Blonde. Beautiful. Sophisticated in a way that made Joanna suddenly conscious of her own simple black dress from Target, her natural hair frizzing in the humidity, her mud-stained shoes. Camille Brooks. Julian's colleague from the firm. The woman whose texts Joanna had questioned 6 months ago. The woman he'd sworn was just a work friend. "Is that?" Joanna couldn't finish the sentence. Julian followed her gaze. "Yes. That's Camille." He said it like he was introducing a business associate, not the woman who destroyed his marriage. "She's pregnant, Joanna. I'm starting a real family. A real family." The words hit harder than the rain, harder than the grief, harder than anything she'd ever felt. Holly was right here. Holly, with her father's eyes and her grandmother's smile. And he was saying she wasn't real. Wasn't enough. Wasn't a real family. "Mommy." Holly's voice was small, frightened. "Why is Daddy being mean?" Joanna couldn't answer. Couldn't breathe. She felt eyes on them. mourners who'd come to honor her mother now watching this spectacle instead. She heard the whispers starting. Is that his mistress? At a funeral? My God! That poor child. Seeing all this. 30 feet back, sheltered under a massive umbrella, stood Julian's parents. Victoria and Richard Westmore, dressed in designer black, faces carefully arranged to project sympathy. But Joanna saw the truth beneath the masks. Victoria's mouth twitched with something close to satisfaction. Richard nodded slightly, like Julian had just completed a business deal successfully. They'd known. They'd planned this. They'd probably encouraged it. Joanna turned back to Julian, still holding the envelope she hadn't taken. You're really doing this? Right now? While they're burying my mother? I'm choosing my happiness. He pushed the envelope into her hands, forcing her to take it. Camille makes me feel alive. You make me feel trapped. Trapped. For years of marriage. A daughter. A baby on the way. And she'd made him feel trapped. Holly started crying. Not the confused whimpers from before, but real sobs. Daddy, don't leave. Daddy, please. She tried to run to him, but Joanna held her back, couldn't let her chase after someone who clearly didn't want to be caught. Is Daddy mad at Grandma? Holly's question cut through the rain, through the chaos, straight into Joanna's heart. Is that why he's being mean? Because Grandma went to heaven. Before Joanna could answer, before she could figure out how to explain the unexplainable, Eleanor's sister appeared beside them. Aunt Josephine, 70 years old and fierce, wrapped her arms around Holly. Come with Annie Jo, baby girl. Let's go find somewhere warm and dry. But Mommy needs a minute with your daddy. You come with me. Josephine shot Julian a look that could have melted steel. Some conversations aren't for children to hear. She carried Holly away, the little girl still crying, still calling for her father, still trying to understand why everything was falling apart. Joanna stood alone now at her mother's grave. The casket had reached the bottom. The pastor had stopped speaking. Workers waited at a respectful distance with shovels, ready to fill in the earth. She looked at Julian, really looked at him, and saw a stranger wearing her husband's face. You're making a mistake, she said quietly. You have no idea what you're doing. He smiled. Actually smiled. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm choosing my life. My future. He glanced back at Camille, who gave him an encouraging nod. Something you should try. Then he walked away. Back to Camille. Back to his parents. Back to whatever new life he'd already built in his mind. Joanna watched him go, divorce papers clutched in one hand, her other hand protecting the daughter he'd never meet. Around her, mourners dispersed, relieved to escape both the rain and the uncomfortable drama. Some offered hollow condolences. Most avoided her eyes. When everyone had gone, when even the workers had retreated to give her privacy, Joanna knelt in the mud beside her mother's grave. The rain had lightened to a drizzle, but she was already soaked through. Mama, she whispered, her hand on the fresh earth. He left me. Right here. At your funeral. How could he be this cruel? The wind rustled through the trees, and somewhere in her grief-soaked mind, a memory surfaced. Her mother's voice, strong and certain, from a conversation years ago. Baby girl, let them underestimate you. That's when you have the most power. Eleanor had said it when Joanna was 15, facing down a teacher who'd assumed she wasn't college material because of where they lived, because of how they looked. Eleanor had taught her that being underestimated was a gift, if you were smart enough to use it. Joanna looked at the divorce papers, now damp with rain and tears. Julian thought he'd destroyed her. His parents thought they'd finally gotten rid of the woman they'd never deemed good enough for their son. Camille thought she'd won. They had no idea what was coming. Joanna Frances Westmore stood, mud clinging to her knees, rain still falling, and made a silent promise to the woman buried beneath her feet. I'll make them see, Mama. I'll make them all see. She just didn't know yet that her mother had already given her the weapons she'd need. That Eleanor Frances had spent 40 years building an empire in secret, preparing for exactly this moment, ensuring her daughter would never be powerless again. But she'd find out soon enough. The house felt like a crime scene. Joanna stood in the doorway of what used to be their bedroom, staring at the empty spaces where Julian's things had been. He'd worked fast, moved out while she was at the funeral reception, like he couldn't wait even a few hours to erase himself from their lives. The dresser drawers hung open, vacant. His side of the closet gaped empty. Even the framed photos from their wedding were gone, leaving pale rectangles on the walls where they'd hung for 4 years. He'd taken the good furniture, the expensive coffee maker his parents had given them, the flat-screen TV. Left her with the worn couch, the scarred dining table, and a house full of boxes marking the end of everything. "Mommy, when is Daddy coming home?" Holly appeared in the doorway, dragging her stuffed elephant behind her. She'd asked that question 17 times in the 3 days since the funeral. Each time, it carved a new hole in Joanna's chest. "Baby, remember what I told you? Daddy's living somewhere else now. But when is he coming back?" Holly's lower lip trembled. "Did I do something bad?" Joanna knelt down, ignoring the protest from her pregnant belly, and pulled her daughter close. "No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. Nothing about this is your fault." "Then why doesn't he want to see me?" "Because your father is a coward. Because he chose another woman and called her a real family. Because he's rewriting history to make himself the hero." "Daddy's going through something complicated," Joanna said instead, hating herself for protecting him even now. "But it has nothing to do with you. You are perfect and loved." Holly didn't look convinced. She was 3, not stupid. She knew when adults were lying, even when they did it kindly. Joanna's phone buzzed. Another text from the Westmore's lawyer. "The 5th one today. Ms. Westmore, my client insists you execute the divorce documents immediately. Further delay will only complicate matters and increase legal costs you'll be responsible for." She deleted it without responding. Yesterday's message had been even worse. "Mr. Westmore is prepared to pursue full custody if you continue to be unreasonable. Sign the papers." Full custody. They were actually threatening to take Holly. As if abandoning them at a funeral wasn't enough cruelty. Another text appeared. This one from Victoria Westmore herself. "Joanna, you knew this marriage was a stretch from the beginning. Be reasonable. Julian deserves to move forward with his life. So do you. Sign the papers and we can all put this unfortunate situation behind us." A stretch. That's what 4 years of marriage, a child, and a pregnancy amounted to. An unfortunate situation that needed to be put behind them. The subtext was crystal clear. You were never really one of us. We're all relieved Julian is correcting his mistake. Joanna had felt it from the beginning. The subtle condescension, the way Victoria introduced her to friends as Julian's wife, with a certain emphasis that made it sound temporary. The way Richard always seemed surprised when she contributed to conversations, like he'd forgotten she could speak. The questions about her background that sounded innocent but weren't. "Where did you say your people were from? And what does your father do?" "He left before I was born." "It must be nice not having to work. Julian's quite the provider." She'd convinced herself she was being paranoid, that love could bridge any divide. Now she understood, they'd been waiting for this. Waiting for Julian to wake up and realize he'd married beneath himself. The black woman from the wrong side of town who'd somehow trapped their golden boy. Except she hadn't trapped anyone. Julian had pursued her. Proposed to her. Promised her forever. And now he'd left her with nothing. The phone rang. A number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but Holly was watching with those big, hopeful eyes. Maybe it was Daddy calling. "Hello, Joanna? It's Sarah." Sarah Mitchell, one of the wives from Julian's firm. They'd had coffee together dozens of times. Their daughters had playdates. I wanted to call and say I'm so sorry about your mother. And about everything. Thank you." Joanna waited for whatever came next. She could hear it in Sarah's voice, the discomfort, the distance already forming. "The thing is, Brad thinks it's better if we don't, with the situation being so complicated and the firm being involved." She trailed off, not even having the courage to complete the sentence. "I hope you understand." "I understand perfectly." Joanna hung up before Sarah could offer any more false sympathy. That made 3. 3 women who'd called to gently explain why they couldn't be friends anymore. Why their husbands, Julian's colleagues, thought it was inappropriate to maintain contact. Why she was being quietly erased from the social circle she'd spent 4 years cultivating. Her own friends tried to help. Keisha came by with groceries. Tamara offered to babysit. But they were teachers and nurses and social workers. Good people living paycheck to paycheck. They couldn't pay her rent. couldn't fight the Westmore's lawyers, couldn't protect her from what was coming. Joanna opened the refrigerator. Half a gallon of milk, some eggs, cheese slices for Holly's sandwiches. She'd have to make it last until Friday, until her part-time nonprofit salary came through. The salary that barely covered utilities, that Julian had called her hobby job because his income paid for everything else. Everything he'd now taken with him. She closed the refrigerator and leaned against it, hand on her belly, trying to calculate. Rent, utilities, groceries, diapers when the baby came, Holly's preschool, her mother's credit card bills, not huge, but there. How was she supposed to do this alone? Mommy, I'm hungry. I'll make you a snack, baby. That night, Holly woke up screaming. Joanna rushed to her room, 7 months pregnant and moving like a ship in rough waters. Holly was sitting up in bed, sobbing, her stuffed elephant clutched to her chest. Daddy was leaving. Holly cried. He was leaving and I couldn't catch him, and you were crying and Grandma was in a box and… Sure, it's okay. It was just a dream. Joanna climbed into the small bed, pulling Holly close. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. Promise. I promise. They stayed like that for an hour, Holly finally falling back asleep in her mother's arms. Joanna stared at the ceiling, feeling her unborn daughter kick, listening to Holly's breathing even out, and wondering how she was going to keep her promise when everything was falling apart. The next morning, she drove to her mother's apartment. Someone had to pack up Eleanor's things, sort through a lifetime of memories, decide what to keep and what to let go. Aunt Josephine had offered to help, but Joanna needed to do this alone. Needed to feel close to her mother one more time. The apartment was tiny, a one-bedroom in a building that had seen better decades. Eleanor had lived here for 20 years, refusing Joanna's offers to help her find something better. Why would I need anything bigger, she'd always said. It's just me. Just her and apparently secrets. Joanna started in the bedroom, boxing up clothes for donation. Her mother's closet was modest, work clothes, church clothes, nothing fancy. Eleanor had been a community organizer, helping people navigate housing assistance and job programs. Important work that paid barely enough to survive. Or so Joanna had always thought. She moved to the nightstand. Medications, reading glasses, a Bible worn soft from years of use. Joanna picked up the Bible, intending to keep it, when something fell out from between the pages. An envelope. Cream-colored. Sealed. Her name written across the front in her mother's handwriting. For my Joanna, when they show you who they are. Joanna's hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a letter, written in Eleanor's careful script, and something else. A key. Small, brass, with a number engraved on it, 447. She unfolded the letter. My dearest girl, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And if you're reading this now, then something terrible has happened. Julian has shown you who he really is. His family has shown you what they really think of you. And you're probably sitting in my apartment wondering how you're going to survive. Baby, I need you to stop wondering and start listening. Everything you think you know about my life is wrong. Everything you think you know about our family is incomplete. I lived small so you could grow big. I lived quietly so you could be heard. I let them underestimate me, underestimate us, because that's how we survived. But survival isn't enough anymore. Now you need to thrive. Take this key. Go to 1247 Peachtree Street, Northeast. Ask for Thomas Chin. Give him this letter. He's been waiting for this day, though I prayed it would never come. Everything I built for you. For this moment. For when they tried to break you. They thought you had nothing. They were wrong. Show them what a Francis woman can do. I love you more than words can hold. Mama. Joanna read it 3 times, her heart hammering. Then she looked at the key, at the address written at the bottom of the letter, at her mother's signature. What did this mean? What had Eleanor built? Her phone buzzed. Another text from the Westmore's lawyer. Final warning. Sign the papers by Friday, or we proceed with custody action. Joanna looked at the letter. At the key. At the thread on her phone. She thought about Holly's nightmares. About the empty refrigerator. About Julian calling Camille his real family. About Victoria's text. You knew this marriage was a stretch. Then she stood up, tucked the letter and key into her purse, and made a decision. Tomorrow, she'd go to 1247 Peachtree Street. She'd meet Thomas Chin. She'd find out what her mother had hidden. Because if Eleanor Francis had taught her anything, it was this: never let them see you break. And Joanna was done breaking. The law office of Chun and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a gleaming tower in Midtown. Joanna stood in the lobby, holding Holly's hand, feeling completely out of place in her Target clearance dress and scuffed flats. Everyone here looked like they belonged, polished, powerful, expensive. "Mommy, this building is tall." Holly pressed her face against the window, staring down at the city below. "Can we see our house from here?" "I don't think so, baby." Joanna checked the letter again. Thomas Chin, Suite 1520. She'd almost turned around 3 times on the drive over, convinced this was a mistake, that her mother had been confused in her final days, that there was no secret waiting to be discovered. But the key was real. The letter was real. And Eleanor Francis had never been confused about anything in her life. The receptionist looked up as they approached. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Thomas Chin. I have a letter from Eleanor Francis." The woman's expression shifted immediately, from polite distance to something close to recognition. "Ms. Westmore, we've been expecting you. Let me show you to the conference room." She came around the desk, then knelt down to Holly's level. "And what's your name, sweetheart?" "Holly." She held up her elephant. "This is Mr. Trunk." "Well, Holly and Mr. Trunk, we have a special play area with toys and books. Would you like to see?" Holly looked to Joanna for permission. Every instinct screamed to keep her daughter close, but this meeting, whatever it was, probably wasn't meant for 3-year-old ears. "It's okay, baby. I'll be right in there." Joanna pointed to a glass-walled conference room across the hall. "You can see me the whole time." The receptionist led Holly to a corner office that had been converted into a bright, welcoming play space. Through the window, Joanna watched her daughter immediately gravitate toward a dollhouse, Mr. Trunk already making himself at home. "Your mother set that up," a voice said behind her. "6 months ago. She said you might need to bring Holly when you came." Joanna turned to find a man in his early 50s, Asian, impeccably dressed, with kind eyes that somehow also looked sad. "Thomas Chin." He extended his hand. "Your mother was one of my most important clients. And one of my dearest friends. I'm sorry for your loss." "I don't understand." Joanna held up the letter. "What is this? What did my mother?" "Please." He gestured to the conference room. "Let's sit down. What you're about to learn, you'll want to be sitting." The conference room was dominated by a massive table, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and a presentation screen that Thomas activated with a remote. But Joanna's attention went to the folders stacked on the table. Dozens of them, each labeled with addresses, property names, financial statements. "Ms. Westmore." "Joanna. Please." "Joanna." Thomas sat across from her, his hands folded. "Your mother came to me 23 years ago. She'd just made her first property investment, a small apartment building in what was then a very rough part of the city. She paid cash. $23,000 she'd saved over 5 years. Joanna tried to process this. Her mother, saving that kind of money on a community organizer's salary? Thomas continued. She told me she needed everything kept secret. No public records linking her to any properties. Everything in trusts, corporations, structures that would keep her invisible. I asked why. She said, because black women who show wealth become targets. But black women who look poor? We're invisible. And invisible means safe. He opened the first folder, spreading documents across the table. That first building is now worth $12 million. The neighborhood gentrified. Property values exploded. But your mother never sold. She held on, collected rent, used the income to buy more properties. She had a gift. She could see which neighborhoods were about to transform, which blocks developers would target next. She bought before anyone else noticed. Joanna's head was spinning. How many properties? Thomas pulled up a spreadsheet on the screen. Joanna's eyes went wide. Apartment buildings, shopping centers, office complexes, mixed-use developments, properties in Atlanta, Charlotte, Nashville, Birmingham, Jacksonville. A portfolio that stretched across 5 cities, each property marked with acquisition cost, current value, and monthly income. $347 million. Thomas said it quietly, like even he was still awed by the number. That's the current valuation of your mother's real estate empire. All of it held in trust. All of it now yours. The room tilted. Joanna gripped the table to steady herself. That's impossible. My mother worked as a community organizer. She lived in a one-bedroom apartment. She drove a 15-year-old car. She clipped coupons. I know. Thomas's voice was gentle. Because that's what she wanted everyone to see. She understood something crucial. Black wealth has to be invisible to survive. If people had known what she was building, they would have found ways to take it. Questions would have been asked. Suspicions raised. But a humble community organizer living in a modest apartment? Nobody questions that. Nobody investigates that. She lied to me. Joanna's voice cracked. For my entire life she lied. She protected you. Thomas pulled out another folder. And she prepared you. Look at this. He opened what he called the protection plan. Inside were private investigator reports, photographs, bank records, text messages. All dated, all organized, all documenting a story Joanna had lived but never fully seen. Your mother hired an investigator 13 months ago. She suspected Julian was having an affair. She was right. There were photos of Julian and Camille. At restaurants. Entering hotels. In his car, kissing at red lights. The timestamps showed the affair had started while Joanna was pregnant with Holly. Not recently. Not a moment of weakness. A calculated, sustained betrayal. There's more. Thomas flipped through documents. Text messages between Julian's mother and Camille. Victoria Westmore has been paying Camille's rent for 8 months. $2,500 a month. There's also a $30,000 payment made 3 weeks before your mother's funeral. The memo says future considerations. Joanna felt sick. They paid her. They paid her to what? To steal my husband. To ensure he left you. To make sure he had a reason he couldn't back away from. Thomas pulled up more documents. And this is Camille's medical history. No prenatal care. No pregnancy tests. No OB/GYN appointments. The pregnancy is fake, Joanna. It was always fake. The words wouldn't compute. Fake. Camille's pregnancy was fake. Julian had left her, left Holly, for a lie orchestrated by his own mother. Your mother knew all of this before she died. Thomas handed her a sealed envelope. She left you this. With shaking hands, Joanna opened it. Eleanor's handwriting, clear and strong. Baby, by the time you read this, you'll be at your lowest. Good. Rage from rock bottom builds unshakable foundations. Ask me how I know. Everything I built for moments like this. For when people show you who they really are. For when they try to break you because they think you have nothing. They thought I had nothing too. They were wrong. Julian's family never accepted you. I saw it at the wedding in their eyes. They tolerated you because Julian insisted, but they were always waiting for him to come to his senses. Well, he did. And now you know exactly what they think of you. But here's what they don't know. You're a Francis woman. And Francis women don't break. We bend. We wait. We build. And then we rise. Everything in these documents is yours. $300 million in property, generating $1.8 million monthly in passive income. Enough to never worry about money again. Enough to fight back. Enough to show them what they threw away. Use it wisely. Use it strategically. And most importantly, use it to teach Holly that her worth isn't determined by who stays or who leaves. That she comes from a line of powerful women who built empires in silence. Show them what a Francis woman can do. I love you beyond measure, Mama. Joanna read it twice, tears streaming down her face. $1.8 million. Every month. More money than she'd seen in her entire life. Arriving like clockwork from properties her mother had built brick by brick while everyone assumed she was barely scraping by. Mommy. Holly stood in the doorway, Mr. Trunk dangling from her hand. Mommy, why are you crying? Joanna looked at her daughter. Her beautiful, confused, heartbroken daughter who'd asked every day when Daddy was coming home. Who'd had nightmares about being abandoned. Who'd watched her father choose another woman at her grandmother's funeral. She wiped her eyes and held out her arms. Holly climbed into her lap, and Joanna held her close, breathing in her baby shampoo smell, feeling the weight of her small body, understanding for the first time what her mother had really given her. Not just money. Power. The power to protect Holly from ever feeling worthless. The power to fight back against people who thought they could destroy her. The power to teach her daughter that Francis women might be underestimated, but they're never defeated. "Why are you crying?" Holly asked again, touching her mother's wet cheeks. Joanna smiled through her tears. "Because Grandma is still taking care of us, baby. She's still taking care of us." Thomas gave Joanna the weekend to process. Monday morning, she returned to his office, this time without Holly, who was with Aunt Josephine. This meeting, Thomas had warned, would take hours, and it would change everything. The conference room was already full when she arrived. 6 people sat around the table, each with laptops, folders, and the kind of focused energy that came from being paid very well to be very good at their jobs. "Joanna, let me introduce you to your mother's team." Thomas gestured around the table. Marcus Williams, tax attorney. Lisa Park, estate planning. David Okonkwo, real estate management. Sandra Chun, my wife and partner, corporate structures. James Wright, financial advisor. And Dr. Sarah Martinez, child psychologist. A child psychologist. Her mother had hired a child psychologist. "Your mother built more than an empire," Thomas said as everyone settled. "She built a fortress. Every aspect structured to protect you and your children from exactly what's happening now. Let's start with the basics." Marcus pulled up a diagram on the screen, a complex web of trusts, corporations, and legal entities that made Joanna's head hurt just looking at it. "Everything your mother owned is held in irrevocable trusts," Marcus explained. "Julian has zero claim to any of it. Even though you were married when Eleanor died, even though you're still technically married now, he can't touch a dollar. The prenup he insisted on, the one his parents pushed, actually works in your favor. It clearly states that all inherited assets remain separate property." Joanna remembered that prenup. Victoria had presented it 3 weeks before the wedding, making it clear Julian wouldn't marry without it. Joanna had signed, humiliated, feeling like she was proving she wasn't a gold digger. Now that same document was protecting $300 million from the family that had demanded it. "Irony is beautiful sometimes," Sandra said with a slight smile. "They tried to protect Julian's modest trust fund and accidentally protected your empire." "But I don't understand," Joanna said. "How did my mother build all this? She worked as a community organizer. She made maybe $40,000 a year." David leaned forward. "She was brilliant. Her job gave her access to information most investors never see. She worked with housing assistance programs, helping low-income families find apartments. That meant she knew which neighborhoods had strong community ties, which blocks had people fighting to stay and improve their areas. She saw where the city was investing in infrastructure before those plans became public. She identified properties before developers did." He pulled up a map showing Eleanor's acquisitions over 4 decades. First purchase, 1985. A 6-unit apartment building in what was then called a distressed area. She paid $23,000 cash. Lived in 1 unit, rented the others. Used that income to save for the next purchase. By 1990, she owned 4 buildings. By 2012, she just kept buying, kept holding, kept waiting. "Waiting for what?" Joanna asked. "Gentrification." David's tone was neutral, but his eyes held something more complex. "Your mother understood that poor neighborhoods, especially black neighborhoods, eventually get targeted for redevelopment. Property values skyrocket. Longtime residents get pushed out. But if you own the buildings, you control what happens." She kept her rents affordable for existing tenants while the surrounding market exploded. She became a millionaire while appearing to barely get by. She used to say, Thomas added quietly, "I'd rather own the neighborhood than be pushed out of it." James Wright pulled out financial projections. "Your current monthly income from rental properties is $1.8 million. That's passive income. Property managers handle everything. The portfolio is diversified across 5 cities, multiple property types. Even in a recession, you'd be financially secure. 1.8 million. Every month." Joanna thought about the empty refrigerator in her kitchen, the bills she'd been terrified she couldn't pay, the panic that had kept her awake every night since Julian left. "There's something else." Thomas pulled out a leather journal, clearly old and well-used. "Your mother kept strategic notes. She called them her protection protocols." He opened the journal. Inside, Eleanor's handwriting filled page after page with scenarios, strategies, detailed plans for different types of betrayal. If he leaves during pregnancy, if his family tries to take the children, if he claims you're unfit, if they use race as a weapon. Each scenario had a corresponding strategy. Evidence to gather, lawyers to contact, public relations moves, financial countermeasures. Eleanor had wargamed every possible way Joanna could be attacked and mapped out exactly how to fight back. She called this section the Maternal Protection Protocol, Thomas said, turning to marked pages. It's specific to scenarios involving children, and her first priority, always, was protecting their psychological well-being. Dr. Martinez spoke for the first time. Eleanor called me 8 months ago. She was dying, she knew it, and she was worried about her daughter and granddaughter. She explained the situation with Julian, what she suspected was coming, and asked me to prepare a support plan. You knew? Joanna's voice came out sharp. You knew Julian was going to leave me and you didn't tell me? I didn't know for certain. Eleanor had suspicions, evidence of concerning patterns, but she couldn't prove anything definitive. And more importantly, she knew that if she told you, it might push you to act before you were ready, before you had the resources to protect yourself. Dr. Martinez pulled out her own folder. What I can do now is help you navigate this in a way that protects Holly. You're about to go to war with Julian and his family. That's your right, and frankly, they deserve whatever's coming. But Holly is 3. She loves her father, even though he's abandoned her. We need to make sure that when you expose him, you're not destroying her ability to process what's happened. How do I do both? Joanna felt tears threatening. How do I protect her and fight back? Carefully, strategically, by making sure every move you make serves her long-term well-being, not just your short-term satisfaction. Dr. Martinez's voice was firm but kind. Your mother understood this. Look at what she wrote. She pointed to a passage in Eleanor's journal. Victory isn't destroying him. Victory is Holly growing up knowing her worth, understanding that her father's choices reflect his character, not her value. Victory is showing her that women don't have to accept betrayal silently, but they also don't have to sacrifice their children's mental health for revenge. We fight smart. We fight clean. And we win in ways that build her up, not tear her down. Joanna read it twice, her mother's wisdom cutting through the rage and pain. There's one more thing, Thomas said. The Eleanor Francis Foundation. Your mother set up a $40 million endowment, structured and ready to activate. The mission is housing security for single mothers, particularly women of color. She wanted you to run it. Sandra pulled up documents. It's completely separate from your personal assets. Gives you a public platform, establishes you as a philanthropist and businesswoman, creates a network of support and influence. It's also incredibly strategic. Hard to paint someone as a gold digger when she's giving away millions to help vulnerable women. Thomas stood, walking to the windows overlooking the city. Your mother spent 40 years building this. Every property, every trust structure, every strategic note. She built it as both shield and sword. Protection and weapon. Security and power. He turned back to face Joanna. The question now is, how do you want to use it? Joanna looked around the table at the team her mother had assembled. Lawyers who could defend her. Financial advisors who could guide her. Property managers who could maintain the empire. A psychologist who could protect Holly. Everything she needed, waiting for her to claim it. She thought about Julian at the funeral, cold and dismissive. About Victoria's text. You knew this marriage was a stretch. About Camille's fake pregnancy. About Holly's nightmares. About the baby growing inside her who would be born into this chaos. Then she thought about her mother, working for 40 years, building in silence, preparing for exactly this moment. I want to use it all, Joanna said quietly. But I want to do it my mother's way. Patient. Strategic. Invisible until the moment I'm not. She placed her hand on her belly. And I want to make sure that when my daughters grow up, they never question their worth because of who stayed or who left. Thomas smiled. Then let's get to work. Camille Brooks had always been good at identifying opportunities. At 38, she'd built a respectable career as a corporate attorney at Henderson and Associates. Solid billing numbers, decent reputation, partnership track that somehow never quite materialized. She watched younger associates, mostly men, leapfrog past her. Watched them leverage connections, family names, the right last names opening doors her competence couldn't. She'd decided years ago that if the system wouldn't reward merit, she'd learn to work the system itself. Julian Westmore arrived at the firm 18 months ago, lateral hire from a smaller practice, already carrying the golden glow of family money and connections. Camille noticed immediately, not because he was particularly talented, but because he was particularly useful. Old money family, partnership-obsessed parents, and a wife who didn't fit their world. She'd seen Joanna once at the firm's holiday party. Beautiful, yes, but uncomfortable in the designer dress that probably cost a month's rent. Standing alone while Julian networked, one hand protectively on her pregnant belly, the other holding the hand of their toddler daughter. Camille had recognized the dynamic instantly. Julian was a man trying to prove something to his parents, and his black wife, however lovely, was becoming a liability in that mission. So Camille had positioned herself carefully. Coffee runs that turned into conversations. Late nights working on cases that didn't require two attorneys. Sympathetic listening when Julian complained about feeling trapped, about his parents' disappointment, about wanting a son to carry on the family name. "Holly's amazing," he'd say, guilt written across his face. "But my father keeps asking when I'm giving him a grandson. Like my daughter doesn't count." "That's archaic," Camille would reply, her hand lingering on his arm just long enough to register. "You deserve someone who understands the pressure you're under." 6 months of careful work. Then the affair started, his idea, he thought, though Camille had orchestrated every moment leading to it. 3 months after that, she'd floated the idea that changed everything. "I'm late," she'd said one evening in his car, parked outside her apartment. She'd watched his face cycle through panic, then calculation, then something that looked almost like relief. "Are you sure? I'm taking a test tomorrow." "But Julian," she'd placed his hand on her flat stomach. "If I am, I want to keep it. I want this baby." She hadn't been pregnant, hadn't even been late. But she'd seen the way his eyes lit up at the possibility, the way he'd straightened like a weight had been lifted. "My parents would be thrilled," he'd said, and Camille had known she'd won. The fake pregnancy had been easier than expected. A prosthetic bump ordered online. They had them in progressive sizes, designed for women dealing with infertility who wanted to practice being pregnant. Fake ultrasound images downloaded from forums, edited with her name and a local OBGYN's office. Careful photo angles and loose clothing. She'd texted her friend Lauren, the only person who knew the truth. "He's desperate for a son. I'll give him the story of one. 6 months of this, then a convenient miscarriage. And I'm locked in forever as the woman who almost gave him what he really wanted. Better than actually having a kid." Lauren had responded with laughing emojis. "You're diabolical." "I love it." What Camille hadn't anticipated was Julian's obsession intensifying. He started talking about names, about legacy, about his son taking over the family business someday. He researched private schools, talked about raising the child properly, which Camille understood meant not like Holly, not like Joanna. The racism was quiet but constant. Comments about Holly's hair being difficult to manage. Suggestions that Joanna didn't understand their world. Relief in his voice when he talked about having a child who would fit in better with the family. Camille played along, even as disgust curled in her stomach. But disgust didn't pay partnership bonuses. Disgust didn't get you invited to the right dinner parties. The Westmores had been easier to manipulate than Julian. Victoria had cornered her at a firm event, 3 months into the fake pregnancy. "I understand you and my son are close. We're in love," Camille had said simply, knowing Victoria would respond better to directness than apology. "And the baby? Due in October. A boy." Victoria's face had transformed. "Finally. A grandson." Then her eyes had sharpened. "What do you need?" That conversation had led to monthly payments. Victoria covered Camille's rent, $2,500 a month for an apartment far nicer than she could otherwise afford. Richard had pulled strings at the firm. Suddenly Camille was getting better cases, more FaceTime with partners. 2 weeks before Eleanor Francis died, Victoria had transferred $25,000 to Camille's account. The memo read, "Consider this an investment in Julian's future happiness." The money was meant to ensure Camille stayed committed, to cover any expenses that might arise during the divorce, to guarantee she wouldn't get cold feet when things got messy. What none of them knew was that Thomas Chen's investigators had documented every transaction. Now, 3 weeks after the funeral, cracks were forming in Camille's carefully constructed story. "I want to come to your next appointment," Julian said over dinner at his new apartment. Temporary, he kept saying, until the divorce was finalized and he could find something suitable for his growing family. Camille's stomach dropped, but her face stayed calm. "Baby, I told you. Dr. Morrison has this policy about partners at appointments during the first trimester complications. It stresses the baby. You're almost into the second trimester, though. 6 weeks is still considered high-risk period for women my age." She'd researched this extensively. "After 12 weeks, I promise. You can come to every single appointment." Julian frowned but nodded. Camille could see doubt forming in his eyes, small but growing. The excuses were getting harder to maintain. She'd claimed a scare last week to explain why she wasn't showing more. Told him her doctor wanted her on modified bed rest, which conveniently explained why he couldn't visit her office, why she needed privacy. But Julian was starting to ask questions. About which hospital she'd deliver at. About whether she'd had genetic testing. About whether they could hear the heartbeat yet. Each question required another lie. Each lie created another thread that might unravel. "My mother wants to throw you a baby shower," Julian said, reaching for her hand. "She's so excited about her grandson. She's already buying things." Camille forced a smile. "That's sweet. But let's wait until I'm further along. I'm superstitious." What she really thought was, "I have 4 months to figure out how to fake a miscarriage convincingly enough that they'll still keep me around." She'd researched it obsessively. Hospital procedures, what paperwork looked like, how to explain a loss at 4 months versus 5 months versus 6. She'd even considered claiming she delivered stillborn, but that required more documentation than she could fake. Meanwhile, she had no idea that every text to Lauren was being monitored. That her medical records, showing no OB/GYN visits, no prenatal vitamins, no pregnancy tests, were already compiled in a folder. That her online purchases of prosthetic bumps and fake ultrasounds had been traced and documented. She had no idea that Lauren, her supposedly loyal friend, had already been approached by Thomas's team. That Lauren had agreed, for $50,000, to provide testimony about the entire scheme. "I need you to be honest with me about something," Julian said suddenly, his voice serious. Camille's heart raced. "Of course. Anything. Are we doing the right thing? With Joanna, with Holly. I keep thinking about my daughter. The way she looked at me at the funeral. She asked her mother if I was mad at her grandmother. Like that explained why I'd leave. This was dangerous territory. Camille couldn't have Julian developing a conscience now. Holly will be fine. Children are resilient." She placed his hand on her prosthetic bump. "And think about your son. About giving him the life he deserves. The life Holly will have too, both your children raised properly in the right environment." The right environment meant without Joanna. Without the mother who actually loved them. Julian's hand stayed on her stomach, but his eyes were distant. "Sometimes I wonder if my parents pushed me into this. If I made this choice or if it was made for me." "You made the choice," Camille said firmly. "For your happiness. For your future." But she could see the doubt spreading like cracks in ice. Could feel the foundation of her scheme weakening beneath her feet. What Camille didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that Joanna now had access to every piece of evidence. Every text message. Every bank transfer. Every fake ultrasound and online purchase. Every conversation with Lauren that revealed the calculated nature of her deception. She didn't know that Thomas Chen was preparing a presentation that would destroy her career, her reputation, her entire life. She didn't know that Victoria's $25,000 payment had been traced, documented, and would soon be displayed on a screen in front of 400 of the city's most powerful people. All Camille knew was that she had to keep Julian believing for a few more months. Had to maintain the illusion just long enough to secure partnership, to lock down some kind of financial future. She had no idea that her future was already over. That every move she made was being watched, documented, and saved for the moment when Joanna Frances Westmore would reveal exactly what it cost to underestimate a woman who had nothing left to lose. The Victorian mansion sat on 2 acres in the historic Inman Park district, hidden behind century-old magnolia trees and wrought iron gates that opened only with a code Thomas had given Joanna. She'd driven past it 3 times before believing this was really hers. "Mommy, is this a castle?" Holly pressed her face against the car window, eyes wide with wonder. Joanna stared at the 3-story home, restored to perfection, painted a soft dove gray with white trim, a wraparound porch that looked like something from a magazine. Nothing like the tiny rental she'd been living in. Nothing like anything she'd ever imagined owning. "It's Grandma's gift," Joanna whispered, tears threatening. "She wanted us to have a real home." Inside was even more stunning. Original hardwood floors, crystal chandeliers, a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a cooking show, bedrooms that could fit her entire previous house. And in the corner of what must be the library, a portrait of Eleanor, younger, powerful, smiling like she knew a secret the world would never guess. Your mama was something else. Joanna turned to find a woman in her 60s standing in the doorway, elegant in a tailored suit, natural hair cut short and stylish, eyes sharp with intelligence and warmth. "Simone Washington, your mother and I built this empire together. Started as her accountant 35 years ago. Became her business partner, her friend." Simone crossed the room, pulling Joanna into a hug that felt like coming home. "And now I'm here to teach you everything she taught me." Over the next 2 weeks, Simone became Joanna's guide into a world she'd never known existed. "The money is just the beginning," Simone explained during their first strategy session. The library transformed into a war room with whiteboards and documents. "What you need now is visibility, reputation, a public identity that makes you untouchable." "I don't understand." "My mother stayed invisible. Because she was building. You're protecting." Simone pulled up a presentation. "Eleanor stayed hidden because exposure would have invited questions, investigations, people trying to take what she'd created. But you? You've already been attacked. They've already tried to destroy you. So now we flip the script. We make you so visible, so respected, so powerful that when the truth comes out about Julian and his family, nobody will question your credibility." They activated the Eleanor Francis Foundation with a $40 million endowment. The mission: housing security and maternal health for single mothers, particularly women of color. The board: carefully selected community leaders, former politicians, business executives who owed Eleanor favors. "Your first public appearance is Saturday," Simone said. "Maternal health charity breakfast. Very Atlanta establishment. The kind of people Julian's parents consider their peers. I'm 8 months pregnant. I can barely fit in my clothes." "Good. We want you pregnant. Want them to see you carrying Julian's child while he's playing house with his fake pregnant mistress. The visual contrast does half our work for us." Saturday morning, Joanna stood in front of her bedroom mirror, barely recognizing herself. The dress was emerald silk, custom-made to accommodate her belly, while somehow making her look regal instead of awkward. Professional styling had transformed her natural curls into an elegant updo. Subtle makeup enhanced features she'd stopped noticing months ago. "You look like a queen, Mommy," Holly said from the doorway, wearing her own new dress. Nothing flashy, just beautifully made, the kind of quality that whispered wealth rather than screamed it. "Thank you, baby." Joanna bent down carefully, ready to show people what Francis women look like. The breakfast was held at the Georgian Terrace Hotel, the ballroom filled with Atlanta's social elite. Old money, new money, and people desperately trying to prove they belonged in either category. Joanna walked in with Holly's hand in hers, Simone at her side, and felt every eye in the room turn toward her. The whispers started immediately. "Is that Julian Westmore's wife?" "Ex-wife, I heard. He left her for that attorney." "What's her name, Camille? Where did she get that dress?" "That's not off the rack." "And who's that with her?" "Simone Washington? My God, that's serious money." Joanna kept her head high, her smile serene, moving through the room like she'd been attending events like this her entire life. Holly stayed close, her small hand gripping tighter whenever she felt uncertain. The keynote speaker was a state senator talking about maternal mortality rates among Black women. Joanna listened, anger building at statistics she'd lived without understanding. How women who looked like her mother, were 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy complications. How systemic racism in healthcare killed mothers and babies every day. When the senator finished, the foundation director announced a surprise donation. We're honored to accept a $5 million grant from the newly established Eleanor Francis Foundation, dedicated to expanding maternal health services in underserved communities. Every head swiveled toward Joanna as she stood to acknowledge the announcement. $5 million. The number hung in the air like a challenge. After the breakfast, people approached carefully, curious, calculating. Ms. Francis? I'm Margaret Chun, Hospital Foundation Board. We'd love to discuss your mother's incredible legacy. Joanna, please. And yes, I'd be happy to talk about my mother's work. She believed in investing in communities, not just properties. Each conversation was strategic. Each introduction carefully managed by Simone, who knew everyone in the room and exactly which connections would matter most. 2 weeks later, the museum gala. This was riskier. Thomas had confirmed the Westmores would be there, had bought tickets months ago, part of their annual social circuit. Joanna wore midnight blue this time, her pregnancy even more pronounced at 36 weeks, Holly in a matching dress that made them look like a portrait of maternal grace. She saw Victoria first. Julian's mother stood near the sculpture exhibit, champagne in hand, holding court with 3 women from her country club set. Then Victoria looked up, saw Joanna, and went completely pale. Joanna walked directly toward her, Simone's words echoing, "Control the encounter. Own the space. Make them react to you. Victoria, how lovely to see you." Joanna's voice was warm, her smile genuine. She bent down to Holly. "Sweetheart, say hello to your grandmother." Holly looked up at Victoria with wide, uncertain eyes. "But Daddy said we're not family anymore." The silence was devastating. Victoria's friends exchanged glances. One of them, Margaret something Joanna thought, actually winced. "Of course you're family, darling," Victoria said, but her voice shook. "Your father there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," Joanna said pleasantly. "Julian made his choices very clear. But I'm glad Holly still has grandparents who care about her. Children need family, especially during transitions." She said it knowing Victoria's friends were hanging on every word, knowing this story would spread through their social circle by morning. The dignified ex-wife, the confused granddaughter, the family that abandoned them both. "Where are you living now?" Victoria asked, clearly trying to regain footing. "Last I heard, Julian kept the house." "Oh, we've moved to Inman Park. Beautiful Victorian, plenty of space for the girls. My mother left it to us." Joanna smiled. "Along with quite a bit else." I'm discovering she was full of surprises. Victoria's champagne glass trembled slightly. "Your mother? I thought she was a community organizer." "She was. Among other things. Actually, that's why I'm here tonight. The museum's new wing on social justice movements features some of her work. Would you like to see?" Before Victoria could respond, a journalist Simone had carefully positioned appeared. "Ms. Francis? Andrea Martinez, Atlanta Magazine. Could I ask you a few questions about your foundation?" The interview ran 2 weeks later. Full page, with a stunning photo of Joanna in her library, Holly on her lap, Eleanor's portrait behind them. Meet the philanthropist honoring her mother's hidden legacy. The article detailed Eleanor's 40 years of quiet community service and quieter wealth building. It mentioned Joanna's recent divorce, briefly, delicately, and focused on the foundation's mission to help women in situations like the one Joanna had faced. Suddenly single, pregnant, struggling. "My mother taught me that true power doesn't announce itself," Joanna said in the interview. "She built an empire while everyone thought she was barely getting by. She taught me that being underestimated is a gift, if you're smart enough to use it." The article went viral on social media. Other publications picked it up. Suddenly Joanna was being invited to speak at conferences, to join boards, to tell her mother's story at fundraising events. And with each appearance, each interview, each strategic positioning, the narrative about Julian and the Westmores began to shift. "Did you hear? His ex-wife is worth millions. His mother tried to bully her at the museum gala, looked like a fool. Apparently the girlfriend's pregnancy is fake. People are saying it's a scam. Julian left her at her mother's funeral. I heard Holly was there, saw everything. What kind of man does that?" The truth was spreading like wildfire, And Joanna hadn't said a word against Julian publicly. Hadn't had to. She'd simply shown up. Been visible. Let people see her strength, her grace, her power. Let them see what Julian had thrown away. And every time she appeared, 8 months pregnant with his daughter, standing next to their confused 3-year-old, the visual told a story no PR firm could spin. The trap was closing. And Julian had no idea what was coming. Julian couldn't sleep anymore. He'd lie in his temporary apartment, still temporary, 3 weeks later, staring at the ceiling, replaying the funeral. The look on Joanna's face when he'd handed her the papers. Holly's small voice asking why Daddy was leaving. The rain. The mud. His mother's satisfied smile. What had felt like strength in the moment now felt like something else. Something he couldn't quite name, but that sat heavy in his chest at 3 in the morning. Beside him, Camille slept peacefully. 6 months pregnant, supposedly, though her stomach looked exactly as flat as it had 3 months ago. He'd tried to ignore it. Told himself every pregnancy was different. That some women didn't show much. That the internet said it was possible, normal even, for women having their first baby after 35. But doubt had taken root, and it was growing. Camille. He shook her shoulder gently. Wake up. She stirred, reaching for her phone. What time is it? I want to go to your doctor's appointment tomorrow. No excuses. I'm coming. Her body went rigid. Julian, we talked about this. Dr. Morrison has very clear policies. I don't care about his policies. Julian sat up, turning on the bedside lamp. I'm the father. I have a right to be there. To hear the heartbeat. To see the ultrasound. To know my son is healthy. Of course he's healthy. I told you, everything is fine. Then let me come. Camille climbed out of bed, wrapping herself in a robe that should have been straining at the seams but hung loose. Why are you doing this? Don't you trust me? I'm starting to wonder if I should. Her face crumpled. How can you say that? I'm carrying your child. I left everything for us. And now you're questioning me. She was good, he'd give her that. Tears on command. Voice cracking at exactly the right moments. But something felt rehearsed about it now. Performed. I just want to come to one appointment, he said, softening. That's not unreasonable. Fine. Her tone shifted to resignation. I'll call in the morning and ask if Dr. Morrison will make an exception. But if he says no, I need you to respect that. The pregnancy is high risk. Stress isn't good for the baby. Julian nodded, but the doubt didn't disappear. It spread. The next evening, he saw Joanna. The charity auction was at the Four Seasons. Henderson and Associates was a sponsor, attendance basically mandatory for partners and partner track attorneys. Julian had been dreading it, knowing Atlanta's social elite would be there, knowing rumors about his divorce had probably spread. What he hadn't expected was Joanna. She walked in wearing a dress that must have cost thousands, her pregnancy radiant in a way Camille's flatness wasn't. Holly held her hand, dressed like a little princess. They moved through the room with a confidence that made Julian's chest tighten. This wasn't the woman he'd left sobbing in the mud. This was someone else entirely. Is that your ex-wife? Marcus from litigation appeared beside him, champagne in hand. She's certainly landed on her feet. Heard she started some foundation. $40 million endowment. Must be nice. 40 million. The number punched through Julian's fog. Where would she get that kind of money? Marcus shrugged. Inheritance, I heard. Turns out her mother was some kind of real estate mogul. Kept it all quiet. Pretty impressive, actually. Building wealth that substantial while looking like regular working class. Smart strategy. Julian watched Joanna laugh at something Simone Washington said. Simone Washington. One of the wealthiest financial advisors in Atlanta. Why would she be with Joanna unless? His phone rang. His mother. Are you seeing this? Victoria's voice was panicked. Joanna's here. At the Four Seasons. Wearing what looks like designer everything. Who's paying for this? I'm looking at her right now. Find out where the money's coming from. This doesn't make sense. Her mother was a community organizer. There's no way. I have to go, Mother. Julian hung up and immediately called his sister. Rebecca answered on the first ring. Let me guess. You just saw Joanna looking like $1 million and you're freaking out. How did you? Because I've been trying to tell you for weeks, you idiot. You left her right when she inherited. Eleanor Francis wasn't just a community organizer. She was a real estate investor. Massive portfolio. I tried to find details, but everything's locked up in trusts. Legal fortress. But the rumors say 300 million. Maybe more. The room tilted. That's impossible. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it explains a lot. The foundation. The house in Inman Park. The fact that she's not falling apart without your money. Rebecca's voice turned sharp. You divorced her at her mother's funeral, Julian. The optics were already terrible. Now add in that she inherited a fortune, and you look like the biggest fool in Atlanta. Julian hung up and immediately started searching his phone. Eleanor Francis. Real estate. Investment. But there was nothing obvious. No news articles. No public records linking her to wealth. Just obituaries mentioning her community organizing work. Her modest life. Exactly what someone would find if they were hiding wealth. Growing paranoia clawed at him. He looked across the room at Joanna again. She was talking to the mayor now, Holly saying something that made everyone laugh. His daughter. The one he'd barely spoken to since the funeral. When had his life become this? Julian. Camille appeared at his elbow, champagne in hand. Champagne she shouldn't be drinking if she was pregnant. Can we leave? I'm not feeling well. You never feel well. Or you feel too well. Or you have a scare. Or the doctor says this or that. He turned to face her. Show me your stomach. What? Your stomach. You're 6 months pregnant. Show me. Color drained from Camille's face. Here. Are you insane? Then let's go to the parking lot. Right now. And you can show me there. He gripped her arm, not rough but firm. Or we can drive to the hospital and get confirmation from the emergency room. Your choice. You're hurting me. I'm barely touching you. Stop performing and answer the question. Are you actually pregnant? Camille's mask cracked. Just for a second, but he saw it. Fear. Calculation. Desperation. Let's go to the car, she whispered. They made it to the parking garage before the fight erupted. I can explain, Camille started. Explain what? That you're not pregnant? That you've been lying to me for months. I did this for us. Her voice rose, echoing off concrete. You were trapped in a marriage that was never going to work. Your parents wanted you with someone appropriate. Someone who fit your world. I gave you the excuse you needed. The excuse, Julian's mind reeled. The baby is fake. There is no baby. There could be. We could actually try. I've researched IVF. We could. You lied to me. You manipulated me into destroying my family for a pregnancy that doesn't exist. Camille's face hardened. Your family was already broken. Joanna never fit. Your parents knew it. You knew it. I just helped you admit it. You helped. Julian thought about Holly crying at the funeral. About Joanna's hand shaking as she signed those papers. About walking away from his pregnant wife because Camille had promised him a son. You destroyed my marriage for nothing. Your marriage was already dead. I just buried it. Julian stared at this woman he'd risked everything for. Saw her clearly for the first time. The calculation. The ambition. The complete lack of remorse. We're done, he said quietly. You can't be serious. What about? There is no baby. There was never a baby. We're done. He got in his car and drove. No destination. Just away. He ended up parked outside the Victorian in Inman Park. Joanna's house. Joanna's massive, expensive house that she'd never mentioned. That had been waiting this whole time. He called her. Voicemail. Called again. Voicemail. 23 calls over 2 hours. Each voicemail more desperate than the last. Joanna, please pick up. I need to talk to you about something important. It's about Camille. You were right. You were right about everything. Please. I know I don't deserve it, but please just call me back. I miss Holly. I miss you. I made a terrible mistake. By the final message, he was crying. Please. Just let me explain. Let me try to fix this. None of them were returned. Meanwhile, 20 minutes away, Dr. Martinez sat across from Holly in a play therapy session. Can you show me how you feel when you think about Daddy? Dr. Martinez asked gently. Holly picked up a small figure and placed it far away from the others. He's over there. By himself. Because he chose to leave. How does that make you feel? Sad. Holly's voice was matter of fact. But Mommy says people make choices and we have to let them. And that Daddy's choices aren't about me. They're about him. Dr. Martinez glanced at Joanna, who watched from behind one-way glass. Later, in her office, Dr. Martinez was direct. Holly understands more than you think. She's watching how you respond to Julian. If you fall apart, she'll think his leaving means something catastrophic. If you show her strength, not fake cheerfulness, but genuine resilience, she'll learn that people can survive being underestimated and abandoned. He's calling, Joanna said, checking her silenced phone. 23 times. Are you going to answer? Joanna thought about Holly's small figure placed far away. About the lesson her daughter was learning. About Eleanor's words. Victory is Holly growing up knowing her worth. No, she said finally. Holly's well-being comes first. But justice. She met Dr. Martinez's eyes. Justice will still come. Eleanor Frances Westmore came into the world at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, weighing 7 pounds, 3 ounces, with her grandmother's eyes and her mother's fighting spirit. Joanna held her for the first time and whispered, "Your grandmother built an empire for you, baby girl. Now we protect it." Holly, visiting with Aunt Josephine, touched her sister's tiny hand with reverence. "She looks like Grandma's picture." "She does," Joanna agreed. "That's why she has Grandma's name." 2 weeks later, Joanna stood in her bedroom at the Victorian, staring at the emerald green gown hanging on her closet door. Tonight. Everything led to tonight. "The ballroom's ready," Simone said from the doorway. 400 confirmed guests. Every major news outlet. The presentation is loaded and tested. Thomas has the evidence folders for legal follow-up. "We're as prepared as we can be." Joanna nodded, nursing Eleanor, who was already developing a predictable schedule that made tonight possible. "And they're all confirmed to attend?" "Julian, Camille, the Westmores. Social obligation is a beautiful trap. They bought tickets months ago. The Westmores chair the Historical Society. Missing the gala would be noticed. They're trapped and they know it." The Windsor Hotel's grand ballroom glittered with crystal and candlelight. 400 of Atlanta's elite filled tables draped in white, champagne flowing, the charity gala circuit in full glory. This was the Westmores' world, the place they'd always belonged while treating Joanna like a temporary visitor. Tonight that changed. Joanna entered at precisely 8 o'clock. The emerald gown fitted perfectly, elegant without being flashy. Baby Eleanor slept in her arms, wrapped in white, impossibly small and perfect. Holly held her mother's hand, wearing a dress that matched her sister's blanket, her natural curls styled with a delicate headband. 3 generations of Francis women. The visual impact stopped conversations mid-sentence. Joanna walked through the ballroom slowly, letting everyone see. The abandoned pregnant wife now radiant in designer clothes, holding her newborn daughter, her 3-year-old, at her side. The optics were devastating even before she said a word. She found them immediately. Julian sat at table 12 with Camille, who looked thin and desperate in a dress too tight to hide the absence of pregnancy. Victoria and Richard flanked them, the whole family arranged like they were facing a firing squad. Julian's eyes met hers across the ballroom. She saw everything in that glance: regret, panic, shame, and dawning realization that something terrible was about to happen. Joanna didn't acknowledge them. She walked to the stage, where Simone waited with Holly's hand. Baby Eleanor was transferred to a trusted nurse offstage. Holly stayed, sitting in a small chair beside the podium, exactly as they'd practiced. "Good evening." Joanna's voice filled the ballroom, amplified but steady. "Thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate the inaugural Eleanor Francis Foundation Gala. Before we discuss the Foundation's mission, I need to tell you a story. One that begins 4 months ago, at my mother's funeral." The room went silent. 4 months ago, my husband served me divorce papers at my mother's graveside. Her voice didn't shake. She'd practiced this moment until it was muscle memory. The casket was still being lowered. I was 7 months pregnant with his child. Our 3-year-old daughter watched him do it. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Heads turned toward table 12. Julian's face drained of color. I share this not for sympathy, but for context. Because what happened next is a story about underestimation. About people who assume a black woman working in social services has nothing. About families who think their money and status make them untouchable. About what happens when both assumptions prove catastrophically wrong. The screen behind her illuminated. Eleanor's face appeared, younger, powerful, smiling. My mother, Eleanor Francis, worked as a community organizer for 40 years. Everyone saw a humble woman helping low-income families navigate housing assistance. What they didn't see was a genius who spent those same 40 years building a $300 million real estate empire. The number hung in the air like a bomb. The screen filled with property listings, acquisition records, current valuations. Building after building. City after city. Decades of strategic investments compiled into an empire nobody had suspected. She bought properties in neighborhoods everyone else ignored. Held them as they gentrified. Kept ownership hidden in trusts and corporations because she understood that black wealth must be invisible to survive. She was right. If people had known what she was building, they would have found ways to take it. Holly sat perfectly still on her chair, watching her mother with serious eyes. My mother also understood betrayal. She hired a private investigator 13 months ago when she suspected my husband was having an affair. She was right about that too. The screen changed. Text messages between Julian and Camille appeared, time-stamped and enlarged. I need to see you. Joanna's at some baby class with Holly. Your apartment or mine? Mine. She won't be home for hours. The date, 3 years ago. While Joanna was pregnant with Holly. More messages scrolled. A year of affair documented in texts, photos, receipts. Julian and Camille at restaurants. Hotels. His car parked outside her apartment at midnight. Victoria stood abruptly. This is slander. I won't sit here, Anne. Please stay, Victoria. Joanna's voice cut through the ballroom like steel wrapped in silk. This concerns your granddaughter's inheritance. I think you'll want to hear it. Victoria froze, trapped between social obligation and self-preservation. She sat down slowly. My ex-husband left me for Camille Brooks, his colleague, who claimed to be pregnant with his child. A son, specifically. Something his family desperately wanted. Joanna's eyes found Julian. The pregnancy was fake. The screen filled with evidence. Text messages between Camille and her friend Lauren. He's desperate for a son. I'll give him the story of one. You're faking a pregnancy? That's insane. It's insurance. 6 months of this, then I'm locked in forever. Medical records appeared. Camille Brooks' patient record, no prenatal care. No pregnancy tests. No OB/GYN appointments. Pharmacy records. No prenatal vitamins prescribed or purchased. Camille stood, stumbling toward the exit. But journalists blocked every door, cameras recording everything. There's more, Joanna continued. My former mother-in-law paid Camille $25,000 2 weeks before my mother's funeral. The bank memo reads, "Consider this an investment in Julian's future happiness." The screen displayed the wire transfer. Victoria's account to Camille's. The amount. The date. The memo. She paid another woman to steal my husband. To ensure he left me when I was most vulnerable. To guarantee her son would divorce the black woman who never quite fit their world. The silence was absolute. 400 people stared at table 12 like it was a crime scene. Holly stood up from her chair. Dr. Martinez had prepared them for this moment, had made sure Holly understood what she was choosing to do. Excuse me? Holly's small voice carried in the hush. Can I ask a question? Every eye turned to the 3-year-old standing on stage. Why did Daddy leave when Grandma died? Her voice was clear, innocent, devastating. Mommy said people make choices. Why did Daddy choose to leave when we were sad? The silence that followed was deafening. No one moved. No one spoke. Holly's question hung in the air, unanswerable in any way that didn't damn Julian completely. Joanna bent down, eye level with her daughter. Because Daddy thought we were worth less than we are. She said it loud enough for everyone to hear. He was wrong. She straightened, facing the ballroom. My daughters, Holly and Eleanor, are now heirs to one of the largest property empires in this city. The Eleanor Francis Foundation has $40 million to support women like me. Women who've been told they're not enough. Women abandoned when they're vulnerable. Women underestimated because of their race, their class, or their gender. The screen changed one final time. Legal documents. Employment contracts. My ex-husband violated his firm's ethics policy by conducting an affair with a colleague. Camille Brooks may face Bar Association review for fraud. And the Westmore family's reputation. Joanna smiled, cold and precise. Well, You're all witnessing that destruction in real time. She picked up Holly, holding her close. My mother taught me that true power doesn't announce itself. That being underestimated is a gift if you're smart enough to use it. That justice, when it finally comes, should be served with precision and evidence that can't be disputed. She looked directly at Julian. Thank you for underestimating me. It made tonight possible. The ballroom erupted, not in applause but in chaos. Journalists swarming. Social media feeds exploding. The Westmores fleeing toward exits blocked by cameras. Camille nowhere to be seen. Julian sitting alone at table 12, his perfect life destroyed in 20 minutes of carefully documented truth. Joanna walked off stage with Holly in her arms, collected baby Eleanor from the nurse, and left through a private exit. Behind her, the reckoning she'd unleashed would echo for years. But ahead of her, in the car waiting to take them home, was the life her mother had built. The empire Eleanor had created. The future Holly and Eleanor would inherit. And Joanna was finally at peace. The headlines hit before sunrise. Hidden Empire. How Eleanor Francis protected her daughter from devastating betrayal. Atlanta Journal-Constitution. $300 million real estate mogul lived in poverty to build generational wealth. Wall Street Journal. Gala expose reveals fake pregnancy scheme, family conspiracy. CNN. Justice served. How one mother's strategic planning saved her daughter. Washington Post. Joanna sat in her kitchen, feeding Eleanor while Holly ate cereal, scrolling through the news on her tablet. Every major outlet had picked up the story. The video from the gala had gone viral. 12 million views overnight. Hashtag Eleanor Francis and hashtag Joanna Francis were both trending nationally. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing. Interview requests. Speaking invitations. Women sharing their own stories of betrayal and survival. Messages of support from people she'd never met saying she'd given them courage. By noon, the consequences had begun. Henderson and Associates released a statement. Julian Westmore has been placed on indefinite administrative leave pending an internal ethics investigation into alleged violations of firm policy regarding workplace relationships. The Georgia State Bar announced. Attorney Camille Brooks's license has been temporarily suspended while the Office of General Counsel investigates allegations of fraudulent misrepresentation. Victoria and Richard Westmore's names disappeared from every social registry, every charity board, every elite gathering they'd dominated for decades. Their friends stopped returning calls. Their country club whispered. Their world, built on reputation and perception, crumbled in less than 24 hours. Julian's custody petition, filed in desperation 2 weeks before the gala, was denied within days. The judge's ruling was brief and devastating. Given the documented pattern of abandonment, manipulation, and prioritization of personal desires over parental responsibilities, supervised visitation is granted. 2 hours weekly, pending completion of family counseling. 2 hours a week. To see the daughters he'd walked away from at a funeral. The first supervised visit happened at a child advocacy center, neutral and clinical. Joanna brought Holly, but stayed in the waiting room. Dr. Martinez monitored through one-way glass. Holly sat across from her father, holding Mr. Trunk, her face serious. "I'm sorry," Julian said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Daddy made terrible mistakes." "Mommy says people make choices," Holly replied, her 3-year-old wisdom cutting deeper than any adult accusation. "You chose to leave when Grandma died. That was your choice." Julian tried to explain, to justify, to make her understand. But how do you explain to a child that you abandoned her for a lie? That you prioritized status and legacy over her worth? That you believed she wasn't enough because she was a girl, because her mother was black, because she didn't fit the image your parents demanded? You can't. And Julian was learning that some consequences can't be talked away. Meanwhile, the Eleanor Francis Foundation exploded. Donations poured in. $45 million in the first month alone. Women who'd survived similar betrayals. Philanthropists moved by Eleanor's story. Corporate sponsors eager to be associated with the narrative of black women building generational wealth. Within 6 months, 3 maternal health centers opened in underserved communities. Each named after Eleanor. Each staffed with doctors who looked like the mothers they served. Each offering care that treated black maternal health as the crisis it was. Joanna stood at the ribbon cutting of the first center, baby Eleanor strapped to her chest, Holly holding the giant scissors. My mother believed in investing in communities, not just properties, Joanna told the crowd. She believed black women deserved wealth, health, and dignity. This center is her legacy. And it's just the beginning. The transformation was complete. Joanna Francis, no longer Westmore, that name legally dropped, became CEO of Francis Properties, managing the empire her mother built. She hired David Okonkwo to handle day-to-day operations while she focused on strategic expansion and the foundation's growth. She appeared on magazine covers, spoke at conferences, joined boards not as a token, but as a power broker. The same social circles that had excluded her now competed for her attention, her donations, her endorsement. But the greatest transformation happened at home. 6 months after the gala, on a warm September afternoon, Joanna sat in Eleanor's garden watching her daughters play. Holly, now 4, pushed Eleanor in a baby swing, singing to her sister about butterflies and rainbows. "Mommy," Holly called, "tell me again about Grandma's superpower." Joanna joined them on the grass, pulling Eleanor into her lap. Which part? The invisible part. How she was invisible, but we're not. Joanna smiled, settling back against the magnolia tree. Grandma made herself invisible so we could be seen. She was quiet so we could be heard. She let people underestimate her, while she built something they couldn't take away. And then, when the time was right, she gave us the power to show the world who we really are. Because she was smart, Holly said with certainty. Because she was brilliant, Joanna corrected. And she taught us to be brilliant too. Eleanor babbled, reaching for her sister. Holly took her hand, and they sat there, 3 generations of Francis women connected by Eleanor's strategic love. The next week, Essence magazine published their cover story. The photo showed Joanna in Eleanor's library, both daughters with her, Eleanor's portrait on the wall behind them. The headline, "Building Empires, Breaking Cycles, The Francis Women's Story." The interview question that resonated most came near the end. What do you want to teach your daughters? Joanna's answer became the quote shared 1,000,000 times. That their worth isn't determined by who loves them or leaves them. That they come from a line of women who built empires in silence and emerged when the time was right. That being underestimated is a gift, if you're smart enough to use it. I want them to know their grandmother didn't live small because she was small. She lived strategically. She understood that visibility without power is vulnerability. But power built invisibly? That's unshakable. That's what she gave us. The power to stand in our truth without apology. The article ended with Joanna's reflection on the gala. Justice isn't revenge. It's truth delivered with precision. My mother taught me that you don't destroy people. You show them who they destroyed themselves. Julian and his family made choices. I simply documented those choices and presented the evidence. The destruction they're experiencing now? They did that to themselves. One evening in early winter, after both girls were asleep, Joanna stood in Eleanor's library, now her office. The room where she managed the empire, directed the foundation, built the future her mother had envisioned. Holly's homework sat on the desk, next to Eleanor's teething ring. Evidence of the beautiful chaos of their lives. On the wall, Eleanor's portrait looked down. Beneath it, a plaque with her words. Let them underestimate you, baby girl. That's when you have the most power. Joanna touched her mother's face in the portrait, tears streaming down her own. We did it, Mama, she whispered. They see us now. Holly and Eleanor will grow up knowing they're powerful, knowing they're worthy, knowing they come from women who refused to be erased. You built this for us. And I promise, I'll teach them everything you taught me. The camera of her laptop was on. She was recording a video message for her daughters to watch when they were older. When they could understand the full story. When they needed to know what their grandmother did and why their mother fought back. She turned to face the camera. Holly, Eleanor, if you're watching this, you're old enough now to understand what happened. Your father made choices that hurt us. His family tried to break us. They thought we were nothing because we came from nothing. They were wrong about everything except one thing. We did come from nothing. Your grandmother Eleanor started with $23,000 and 40 years of determination. She built $300 million in property. She did it while everyone thought she was barely surviving. And she did it so that when someone tried to destroy us, we'd have the power to survive and thrive. Joanna's voice strengthened. I'm not telling you this to teach you to hate your father. I'm telling you this to teach you to love yourselves. To know your worth isn't determined by who stays or leaves. To understand that power built quietly is power that lasts. To know that you come from women who faced impossible odds and won. She glanced at Eleanor's portrait. Your grandmother used to say, let them underestimate you. That's not about staying small. It's about being strategic. It's about building your foundation before you announce your presence. It's about having power before you show it. Joanna smiled at the camera, at her future daughters watching this years from now. You are Francis women. You are brilliant. You are powerful. You are worthy. And anyone who makes you doubt that. Her smile turned sharp. They're making a mistake they'll regret for the rest of their lives. She ended the recording and saved the file. One day, Holly and Eleanor would watch it. Would understand. Would carry on the legacy Eleanor had built and Joanna had protected. The camera pulled back, the lens capturing the scene. Joanna at the desk, Holly's homework spread out, Eleanor's toys scattered nearby. Eleanor's portrait on the wall, her words illuminated beneath. 3 generations of Francis women. Finally visible. Undeniably powerful. And completely unbreakable.